Good evening, everyone. Welcome to all members of the committee and welcome to all members of the public who are joining us this evening. We're glad that you're with us. The first item on the agenda is disclosure of pecuniary interest. Ask any member if you have one of those you'd like to declare at this time. Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime you need to. We have no additions, deletions, or amendments. We do have one open forum request. Hopefully she's with us. It's from Andrea Williamson. She's here to talk to us about item 7.3.1, the traffic bylaw update. And I'll just remind Ms. Williamson that our open forum sessions are 3 minutes in length. So you got 3 minutes, Andrea, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll do my best to stay within that 3 minutes. Thanks for giving me a chance to speak today. The item I wanted to bring up today was Bruce Street and Joseph Street, that intersection near Northport Public School. This intersection is not actually part of the report that's being discussed today, except in the fact that there will be a new school zone being discussed, and this is within that school zone. Bruce and Joseph Street is a busy intersection. It's getting far more busy as we have more development on Devonshire Road, and there are no traffic calming measures in place between Devonshire Road and Market Street. This intersection also has a lot of people starting to park on Bruce Street, and that makes visibility really difficult. There's also a bend in the Bruce Street road just south of the intersection, which makes it difficult to see oncoming cars. We've had a lot of situations where children are waved through by well-meaning motorists, and then they end up crossing diagonally in unsafe directions, or cars coming from the other direction don't know what's happening, and it gets to be really dangerous during those drop-off and pick-up hours. So, the school zone will help. However, with a big wide open road and no anything to really designate it as a school zone, some other measures might be more helpful, not just a sign. So some things that could be considered would be painting lines on the road to help children cross safely, and also to alert motorists that this is a crossing zone, not just a school zone. Some other things you could consider are traffic squeezing poles like they have at Huron Heights Public School in Kincardine, or perhaps putting up speed sensors so that motorists are aware of the speed that they're driving down this wide open spot of road here. So these are just some suggestions, and I really request that council take a look at this area in the future, and that any future traffic study be done when school is in session, because previous studies have been done in the summer when there aren't any kids there. So you're not really getting representative data. So I think my 3 minutes are up. Thanks for letting me have a chance to speak. And if you've got any questions, I think Luke's got my contact information. Thank you so much.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Andrea. We'll be talking about that in a few minutes. Okay, so we have no further open forum requests. We have no delegations this evening. We have no public meetings. So that moves on to 7, reports of municipal officers and committees, and 7.2, a general government report on the 2020 year-end financial report, and we'll turn it over to the treasurer for the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Staff have finalized the 2020 financials for the corporation, and this report outlines the results for the year. The report contains a number of appendices that add financial detail for internal purposes, such as segmented operational information, to accompany the audited financial statements that will be presented by BDO. Appendix A shows the operating results by program area, including reserve transfers into and out of those areas. The town's operating results in 2020 largely fell in line with budget, with a net budget surplus of $774,000. The majority of this surplus was related to unbudgeted supplemental taxation revenue, with the rest coming from a variety of sources, such as labor expense management, bank interest, an increase to the Westario dividend, and overall expense management. This allowed for a large transfer to the tax stabilization reserve, as well as an additional transfer to the future capital reserve, both done in line with our reserve transfer policy. With the exception of the tax stabilization reserve, we put in an increased amount to cover the amount that was approved to come out in the 2021 budget. Appendix B shows all capital projects that had available funding or spending activity in 2020. The foundation of this report is built as a finance report. It's a listing of projects that we use to assign funding based on budgets and council motions through the year. We have also included a simple open or closed status to each project, but Please keep in mind that this is as of December 31st last year, and any projects that had any financial activity remaining into 2021, including holdbacks, will be listed as open. Staff will again be reporting on capital projects as of June 30th, 2021 at an upcoming council meeting. Appendix C shows the reserves and reserve funds, and is the appendix that relates to the motion that is in front of you. This sheet lists every reserve along with its starting balance, a detailed description of activity during the year, and the ending balance. And again, staff will show an updated reserve sheet as part of the mid-year financial reporting or in advance of the 2022 budget process. Appendix D just continues from Appendix C in that it shows the subledger of prior year capital reserves that are included in Appendix C. It shows up the projects that make up the total balance of those reserves. And Appendix E shows our development charges activity for the year, including all transfers in or out of the DC reserve. The final balance of each DC area was used in the new DC background study that was presented to council earlier this year. And that wraps up my comments, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Questions or comments from members of the committee? I don't see any. All right, well, thank you very much for that report then, Dan. And there's a recommendation that council authorize the transfers to or from reserves and reserve funds as outlined in Appendix C of the report. If there are no questions or comments, then I will ask all in favor. That is carried. Okay, then that moves us on to item 2, staff report on the 2020 financial statements and a presentation by Tracy Smith, the BDO, but we'll start with the treasurer.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. This report just introduces the 2020 financial statements and the auditor's final report to council, prepared and presented by our auditors at BDO. The financial statements are prepared and audited as required by the Municipal Act and are prepared under public sector accounting standards. So Tracy Smith from BDO will now present the report.
Thank you, Thank you, Daniel. I'd like to thank the council for inviting me to your virtual meeting this evening. Elizabeth Alexander, the senior manager, is also on the call this evening, and she is running the technical part of the presentation. We would like to thank Daniel and Denica for their assistance, and also all the other municipal staff who helped us during the audit. The audit was performed 100% virtually and poses some additional challenges as we learn to navigate the virtual world and exchange information electronically. So we do appreciate everyone's patience as we completed the audit. As your auditor, we have the responsibility to communicate with those charged with governance on an annual basis. The report with the picture on page 31 of the agenda package and also on your screen contains all the required communications under Canadian auditing standards. The communication is very similar year to year as the content is prescribed by the standards and is required to be communicated on an annual basis. So I'll provide just a brief summary of that communication and then provide a high-level overview of the draft financial statements. Since we are virtual, I'll stop at the end of the written communication for questions and then again after discussing the draft financial statements. So if we can turn to the summary, the financial statements are in draft and provided in Appendix A. The financial statements need to be approved by council before they can be released in final. And once we have that approval, we will need to obtain a signed management representation letter and subsequent review up to the financial statement approval date. These financial statements do reflect the motion that you just approved for the transfers to and from reserves. So I just wanted to point that out. The materiality amounts are material if they would affect the decisions of users relying on the financial statements. The materiality we used was $900,000. As your auditor, we provide reasonable but not absolute assurance, as we can't audit 100% of the transactions, especially virtually. So we use this materiality to focus on high-risk areas and to calculate sample levels using statistical sampling methods. In terms of audit risks, our audit strategy and procedures were outlined in our planning report. There were no changes to our plan procedures and no issues were identified in our testing performed. So no additional risks were identified during the audit. Internal control matters were required to report to you in writing any significant deficiencies in internal control that we have identified during the audit. And during the course of the audit, we did not become aware of any weaknesses in the design or the implementation of the internal controls we tested. We are required to report to you annually that we at BDO are independent of the town. A sample representation letter is included in Appendix C. We are required to report to you if we find any unadjusted differences during our audit. These are detailed in Appendix B, and since the total income statement effect is not material, we can issue an audit opinion that these financial statements are not materially misstated. Auditing standards require an annual communication about the responsibilities for detecting fraud and to highlight it's a shared responsibility between the auditor, management, and council. We did not find any issues or concerns during our audit. If council has any issues or concerns, I can be contacted directly for any further discussions in that matter. Any questions before we go on to look at the numbers? I'll just let Elizabeth scroll to the Appendix A to the financial statements and just take a pause here for any questions on the communication.
Any questions for members at this point? I don't see any, Tracy, so carry on.
Okay, so our audit report is on page 43 of your agenda package, and again also on your screen there. Management is responsible for preparing the financial statements. It's our responsibility as your auditor to give an opinion on these financial statements prepared by management. An audit is the highest level of assurance that we can provide as a public accounting firm. As in prior years, there is a qualification relating to the completeness and existence of capital assets with respect to the timing and recognition of when subdivisions have been assumed in the past. And that is the same as the prior year. Our opinion is in the second paragraph, and in our opinion, except for the qualification, the financial statements do present fairly in all material respects the position of the town in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. The audit report goes on the second page to describe the responsibilities of management and those charged with governance, and further the responsibilities of the auditor with respect to the audit of the financial statements. On page 46 of your agenda package, you'll find the statement of financial position or the balance sheet. So this is at a point in time on December 31st, 2020. At that time, on December 31st, 2020, total assets were $50.6 million. The largest portion is $38.2 million in cash and investments. The cash increased $10 million over the prior year because $7.4 million was put into reserves. Obligatory reserve funds and OCIF grants remain to be spent, and so that increased the cash position as well as the timing of the accounts payable, which was paid after the year end. Liabilities on December 31st, 2020 totaled $31.5 million. As I noted, with the increase in cash, your accounts payable has increased over the prior year due to timing of payments of large construction payments made after year end, and also an increase in your developer deposits. So no concerns there, just the timing of payments. Your deferred revenue, that's the deferred revenue of $10.2 million. That's where you find the development charges reserve, the gas tax reserve, and your unspent OCIFA grants. So those don't get recognized in revenue until they're spent. So they show as a liability until that time. Long-term debt was $13.6 million. So no new debt during the year, and the town did repay $1.3 million in principal over the prior year. That brings us down to the net financial assets. So that's the assets less the liabilities, and that's a key financial indicator for the town. Positive means that you have resources for the future. So the large increase is because you put $7.4 million into reserves, and you did repay $1.3 million in your debt. So as you put money in reserve and pay down debt, the net financial assets increases. The tangible capital assets are the physical assets of the town, and those are at cost less amortization. So it's important to note that that's not replacement cost. That is the original cost of the assets. Accumulated surplus was $185 million. That's the equity accumulated over time, both monetary and physical assets. So that $185 million in accumulated surplus includes $153,000 invested in capital assets, net of the external debt, and $33.5 million in reserves and reserve funds. On the next page, you'll find the statement of operations. This is the transactions for the year. A detailed variance analysis is provided in the staff report that Daniel had just presented to you. So you can find more details in that report. But revenues for 2020 totaled $39.5 million. And that's revenues, including all external revenues for both operating and capital purposes, but it does not include any transfers from reserves. The expenses are all the operating expenses and amortization. So that does not include actual capital purchases or transfers to reserve. And this is in accordance with public sector accounting standards. So it's a little bit different than what you see when you prepare your annual budget, because your annual budget does not include amortization. So when you look at the budget compared to actual numbers for the expenses, it does look a little funny because the amortization is not included in your budget as allowed under municipal regulations. If you remove the amortization from the actual numbers, then your actual expenses are $24.2 million, which is less than you had budgeted for $24.8 million. That brings us down to the annual surplus of $8.3 million. So that's external revenues less expenses. Again, it is important to note that that's not your operating surplus. The operating surplus focuses on the short term and is the amount that affects your budget and your tax rates. As reported in your staff report, the operating surplus for the year was $774,000, and that has been transferred to the reserve for tax stabilization and the reserve for future capital projects, and is reflected in the reserve amounts in these financial statements. The annual surplus that you see on this financial statement of $8.3 million focuses on your long term. So it's the amount of external revenues raised during the year after paying for all your operating costs and to cover amortization. So we take this annual surplus this annual surplus it should always be positive, and it should be a large number because it needs to be a large amount, enough to pay your debt payments and also to fund your capital asset purchases. So on the next page, we take that $8.3 million in annual surplus. We adjust it for the amortization and your actual capital purchases, which brings you down to the net increase in financial assets of $8.5 million. So these funds, this increase in net of financial assets, are the funds that you transfer to reserve of $7.4 million, and it also includes the amount, the funding that was used to repay your principal payments on your debt. The last financial statement is the cash flow statement. And so this is the actual physical flow of the cash that's in your bank account. About the middle of the page, you'll see that you received $17.8 million from operations. A little bit lower, you spent $6.8 million on capital assets, and you repaid $1.3 million in debt. So overall, the town is in good financial position. You've got positive cash flows with almost $31 million in the bank, and you do have reserves of $33.5 million. So that includes a very high-level overview of the financial statements. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Tracy. And we'll open the floor to questions or comments from members of the committee. We'll start with the Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank you, Tracy, for your presentation, and Daniel for all your good work too. I meant to say that earlier, and I sent in a fair number of questions, and I appreciate your timely responses today, Daniel. Tracy, you mentioned about reserves, reserve funds, healthy balance, the town's a good financial position. I see in Daniel's report, Schedule C under reserves, reserve funds, he talks about 42,443,000. You just mentioned a figure of 33 or 34 million. So I'm a little confused. Maybe I'm confusing the two though. When Daniel talks about reserves and reserve funds, the balance was 34 million at the end of 2019, and at the end of 2020, it's 42,400,000, which is a good number, or a good increase, solid increase with our reserves. Are we talking about two different things, Tracy? Because you gave me some different numbers there.
So I think that Daniel can confirm this, but Daniel's will include the obligatory reserve fund, which under public accounting standards are required to be shown as a liability on your balance sheet. So those are under the deferred revenue amounts on your balance sheet. So if you take that, the 33.5 plus what's there, I think you'll get close
the
to
eight some million. Yeah, that's the number I'm out. So thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, can I go back? Is it okay to go back to ask Daniel a question? We don't want to wait. Do you want Tracy to move on? Or I have a question about water reserve fund, and I meant to ask earlier. Can I do it now, or would you rather me wait?
You can go ahead and ask. You may as well ask now. Okay,
Daniel, to you, Daniel. I just under the water reserve under Schedule C, it was an operating. The balance was in a negative position of 370,849 the end of 2019, and we're proposing a operating deficit position of 589,000 the end of December 2020. So water reserve deficit of 589,000. Could you just, for the benefit of the public, is that water tower related? Is a whole bunch of factors related? Could you just explain why the $589,000 deficit in the water reserve?
Yeah. So that is primarily related to the fact that in 2019 we withdrew close to 1.4 million for the Port Elgin water tower project. So when you have a big capital project of that nature that only happens every several years, it's not uncommon for a reserve to go negative like that. We've done a number of financial studies, and we are increasing our water rates. So there is a plan to get that into a surplus position over time. And the other thing I'll say is that the deficit of 589,000 represents just under 14% of our annual revenues, which is not a concerning amount when you compare the deficit position to the annual revenues. So I don't believe it's of a concern, its current position.
Thanks for that. And I just a follow up, if I might, Mr. Mayor. I just you mentioned about creating a positive number over a number of years. Approximately how many years, Daniel, do you see with with the surcharges being levied to our taxpayers? When do you see us getting into the black with our water reserve? How many years is that going to take, do you figure?
I might have to defer to the Director of Infrastructure and Development. I would, sorry, I'll just let her jump in.
And we can do that, the director.
Sorry. I will have to look it up through you, Mr. Mayor, in the financial plan, but I can get back to council with that information.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's the important thing to note for everyone's information is all of that, particularly when it comes to water and wastewater, is managed through a very detailed plan. So we know exactly how much we need to levy and the impact of those reserves. The water system's finances are extremely well planned out for the future. All right, further questions or comments from members? Councilor Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Daniel and Tracy for those comprehensive reports. That was a lot of information to digest through all of those attachments and appendices. My question, Tracy, is when I read the initial report from our treasurer earlier, it notes that we had a $449,000 or $450,000 unbudgeted supplemental tax session revenue. So we collected almost $500,000 in additional taxes. Now, I think we should have seen that coming. I mean, we had in excess of $100 million in building revenue for 2 or 3 years in a row. And I think 2020, when we had $850 million in building revenue. Is that type of unbudgeted supplemental revenue typical of what you might see? Or did we, it seems to me like a lot of money. Did we miss the mark by a long shot, or is that within reasonable plus minus for a municipality of our size?
It's a bit larger unbudgeted amount than you would typically see, but you do have your fairly large municipality, so it's not a large amount of concern.
Okay, I'll just add into that that amount has grown fairly quickly in recent years. It was not so long ago when it was a smaller number, around 250,000 a year or so, and it has we did include supplemental budget supplemental taxation revenue in the 2021 budget, so we are working to address that going forward.
Just a follow-up, if you like, Mr. Mayor, if I could. I know that I recall when we were talking in budgets for 2021 budget, we tried to keep, obviously, as we always do, try and keep the tax increase as low as possible. And one of the things that I recall pointing out was that as we grow, and we're growing very rapidly, we've got 5 or 6 new subdivisions underway at the moment, that we need to more accurately account for where our taxes are going to be, how much we're going to collect this year and how much we're going to collect next year based on this growth factor, which should be fairly easy to predict. I mean, we know how much the houses are, how many new tax rolls we're adding at any given year, and it's in the hundreds. So we could have very easily, I would think, have kept our announced tax increase maybe a couple of points lower than we did by anticipating that number to be as large as it was. So maybe as we go into the fall and the tax year for 2022, we'll be able to put that under a tighter scrutiny and come up with a more reasonable expectation for tax, how much more money we're going to generate in taxes.
I think, as the treasurer noted, we did for the first time historically, the town of Saugeen Shores hasn't budgeted for supplemental taxation. We did that for the first time in 2021. The treasurer and council, I think, took a pretty balanced approach there and didn't budget for all of what we might imagine we would get, but budgeted for some portion of that. And so I think we'll see how that works out at the end of 21 into 22, and we can take another crack at it in 22 and see if we can get closer. But I think the public can be sure council is attempting to factor in supplemental taxation, recognizing that we can't be 100% certain how much we will grow in any given year. So we want to be conservative. We want to be on the low side, but we're certainly working at it. Started in 2021. So further questions or comments? I'll just make the comment. It was interesting, that particularly that net financial assets number, and to see that number growing, and this notion, and so I think it's very important for the public to see that we are using growth to pay down debt and add to our reserves at the same time as we're keeping taxation relatively low. I mean, the municipality year over year gets stronger and stronger financially, and that puts us in a really good position to be able to afford some of these larger projects that council is currently doing and wants to do in the future. I think that this report sort of tells the story of how the municipality will use its growth to fund all of those things that we want to fund, and the public can have confidence that we're building the capacity to do that, and that's sort of written on every page of this document. So I think that's I mean, it's very positive. The one page that I noted, page 24 in the financial statements, the government transfers, and it shows between 2019 and actuals of 2020 $1 million drop in transfers from other levels of government. And I understand that number fluctuates year in and year out depending on projects we're doing and what's going on. But it would be interesting, Daniel, to have a look historically and to go back a little further and just see if there are trends in that number. I think that, you know, and one thing we've identified, and we're putting ourselves in a position to be able to move ahead with things, whether the other governments support us or not, because we have the luxury of growing and we can do that. But that doesn't mean that support from other levels of government isn't needed or welcome. It is, and we would like to get our fair share of support from the government. And I think it would be interesting. It would be an interesting document for us to be able to show, you know, here's how much you supported us 5 years ago, and here's how much you support us now, so that we can try to maintain some level of consistency when we're applying for grants from other levels of government, and say, you know, we shouldn't be seeing a net decline in our support from other levels of government. So perhaps, Daniel, at some point in the coming months, we could see a sort of a longer term look at that, looking at financial statements dating back several years, and see how we're trending on that point. Otherwise, I don't have any other questions or comments. Does anyone else? Don't see any. I'll read the recommendation. It's recommended that council accepts the 2020 annual audited financial statements. There's nothing further. All in favor? That is carried. Okay. Thank you very much, Tracy and Daniel.
Thank you.
That moves us on to 7.3, infrastructure and development. We have 3 reports there, and the first one is a staff report on the traffic bylaw update and the director of infrastructure and development.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to start by thanking the work of the engineering group and the traffic counting and all that has gone into the background of this report. And I'm just going to step through the sections a little longer than I would normally, just to make sure that we're clear on this and the public gets a chance to hear what we're doing. So for the stop sign requests, we had a few come in since the Transportation Master Plan, as well as the ones that had been identified in that plan for needing more information. So these intersections were analyzed by staff, and the results are in the table that's in my report. 2 intersections were identified by council for staff to take a second look at. The first was Huron and High. Originally, the Transportation Master Plan recommended changing it to a 2-way stop and only Huron stopping at High. But because of the confusion that happens with traffic down there and the pedestrians, we looked at that again, and we are recommending to put in a 4-way stop at that location. The second intersection was Bruce and Joseph Street that Mrs. Williamson spoke about today. We did try to get the proper counts down there for pedestrians, but unfortunately the schools did not open again after April 15th, so we didn't feel it was appropriate to move forward with the crossing guard analysis and those things. Sorry, we did get new traffic counts to check the traffic volume change from 2019 to 2021 and to see if a 4-way stop was warranted. It still is not warranted as a 4-way stop. So as an interim measure, we're putting in the community safety zone so that the fines can be doubled for all traffic infractions that are in that area. And I've got a project in the 2022 budget to do a traffic calming analysis by a traffic consultant for that area. So that could include other measures like raised intersections or crosswalks that were identified in the Transportation Master Plan. The universal speed limit reduction to 40 kilometers an hour is another thing that can help Bruce Street as well, and we're looking at putting enhanced identification of that 40-kilometer sign on Bruce Street, specifically at the Devonshire end and at the Pearson Street end. For speed limits, we needed to update some of the rural areas to meet the requirement in the Traffic Act so that you can only change your speed limit by 20 kilometers at a time. So for concession 6, there's going to be a 60-kilometer zone between the existing 40 and the 80 that will effectively be from 1314 to the entrance of the Lamont sports fields. Concession 4 was also asked by us to take a second look. We had come back with a recommendation of reducing it to 70. So we reached out to the traffic engineer, and they agree that a 60 is more appropriate because of the steepness of the slope and the trail at the highway end. So 60 kilometers will be the proposed speed limit from Highway 21 to the lake on concession 4. And concession 4 also needed the same review for the 20 kilometers. So we're recommending having it be 60 from Highway 21 to the existing or to the trail crossing, and then 40 from there towards the lake. On the other side of the highway, it's only a 50. So removing that 80 is what's proposed in that area. It's also supposed to be a future part of the cycling network, and that went into the consideration. The next part of the bylaw we looked at was implementing community safety zones, and these will be new to Saugeen Shores. So we're looking at starting them at the schools and the hospital. So the idea behind a community safety zone is you want to limit the footprint to make them effective. So you don't want to have everything a community safety zone. You need to focus your efforts on where you want this enforcement to take place, and that is why you'll see the tightness to the schools and in the hospital area. Finally, there are some other changes that we include to update the changes to the Highway Traffic Act in relation to oversized loads and the change in the licensing of escort vehicles. We also are going to change the load restrictions on local streets to match the Bruce County system, and we've been doing that informally for years, but now we'll have the ability to enforce it on our streets. We've identified that there's more work to do to implement the recommendations from this transportation master plan, and as we move forward in the future, we're looking at smaller studies for areas of traffic calming, one-way streets, additional community safety zones, and other parking things that will be brought forward for consideration as part of the 2022 budget. In the meantime, for comments on this bylaw, I am accepting comments from anybody who's interested at my email, which is amanda.froze@saugeenshores.ca, and I can be found through the town's website as well. So these comments will take until September 3rd, and then I will prepare a table of those comments and responses when it comes back to council on the 13th.
Very good, thank you, Amanda. Just take a look here. There is a recommendation. I'll read it, then we can take questions or comments from members. It's recommended that council pass a bylaw to amend traffic bylaw 103-2008 at a future meeting. Questions or comments from members of the committee? The Deputy Mayor and then Councilor Grace and Councilor Maya.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Great job, Amanda. There's a lot of stuff on here. I have several comments. The first deals with our presentation. Joseph from Waterloo. Joseph and Bruce. Bruce is far too wide for kids to get across. I have mentioned this 2 years ago. Councilors Smith and Schreider have mentioned this. It is far too big a street, too busy a street, especially now with the construction and the throughway for the kids to get across. I would like to see not stoplights or four-way stops. I like to see either a pedestrian activated stoplights like we put in at Clarendon and Highway 21, or make it dedicated cross guard, having a crossing guard there to get the kids across. Again, far too fast, far too big, far too many people living out there now. So the study, I think, is a little dated. We didn't get accurate information because of COVID, but knowing what we know, we all live there, we drive there. It's kind of like Ivings Drive. We said it needed it, now we got it. We're saying Joseph and Bruce needs that now. Second one I have a comment about is Peel and Grenville. With the Southampton Landing going in there, Peel Street is now one of the three largest thoroughfares in Saugeen Shores in Southampton, especially next to High Street, Huron Street, and Peel Street. The cars come around at McNabb, and I can see the big trucks coming out of the construction zones, and they're hitting the sixth gear by the time they get to the town sheds. They do not follow the speed limits. I would like to see a stop sign put at the corner of, make it a three-way stop at the corner of Peel and Grenville. I know that's be hard for our town vehicles, but they also are part of the issue sometimes as well. When there's the highway closed, that is the alternate route for everybody to get to the dump and to get around town. I don't think we have an accurate assessment of the value and numbers of vehicles that go there through there as well, especially right now. I counted over 70 dump trucks going up and down the road today. As they come in from Carlisle Street, they don't slow down, start to slow down until they get to Gray Street to stop at McNabb. I'm pretty good at telling what 40 kilometers is, and they're not doing 40 kilometers. I also like your the traffic calming measures, especially down at South Street. We have a lot of people mentioning that. We are a very busy town, a lot of construction right now. I'm sure everybody's getting lots of comments about the construction starting on the Beach Street going down to Jerry's Fries. It's going to be very busy, but I like the calming measures that you put in there, especially at South Street with that curve. It's a blind spot. I think that will help alleviate. But with that, we have we have post office boxes there. I think we need to delineate a pull-in zone for traffic there so that people in the neighborhood can pull in to get their mail without having to worry about not having a place to park. That's very important. I think that's all I have for right now, but I do believe we have to act on Joseph and Bruce Street now before school starts. Far too wide, far too fast. Peel and Grenville, the same thing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any comments, any of that, Amanda?
I will say that we need the pedestrian counts for the crosswalk analysis for Bruce Street. So that is planned to happen this fall. And then for Peel and Grenville, it is in the table. We did analyze that. And because it's a three-way stop, you need a 75-25 split. If you're asking us to reconsider, it didn't meet the warrants volume or the split. And then for South Street, I plan on reaching out to Canada Post, and I've asked them last year. I'll ask them again if they would move that community mailbox up to the cul-de-sac so that it can be off South Street entirely to provide some more parking and safer spot to stop to pick up the mail.
You will follow up, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regard to the Peel and Grenville, I think the count was done prior to the construction starting at Southampton Landing. We also have the construction that will be starting up at the soccer field very soon. The counts aren't accurate. And again, I have everybody that lives in the neighborhood saying to me, what can we do to get the cars to slow down here? It's a raceway. If the dump trucks can hit the 6th gear in one block, we're going way too fast. So a three-way stop there, I do believe is warranted because very shortly, phase 3 of Southampton Landing will be putting in another 20 to 30 houses, townhouses in that section of the bush right at that corner. So we will be needing an entrance way for them. And to have that, you're going to have a stop sign anyway. So let's be proactive rather than reactive.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Amanda, for the report and the suggested actions. I have several questions that I'd like to ask. One is about the 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit on North Shore, which we've had for some time, which is in place right now. I had a call from or an email from property owners whose home is about partway through that straight section between North Shore Park and where the hill starts. So I went out on Friday afternoon and sat with them. Fortunately, a police officer was there and already nabbed somebody for speeding, but apparently this is a common area to speed before you hit the hill and the curves that slow people down. So we talked about what additional measures might be used, as well as the 30-kilometer speed limit. And one of the suggestions was considering the trail with a high number of pedestrians and cyclists, if staff would consider looking at the possibility of making this into a community safety zone. Possibly other measures might work as well, like maybe a speed bollard similar to the one that we have in front of the hospital. So then I had in the traffic report, there's a section on the one-way street section, which refers to a request from someone to review the possibility of 3rd Street becoming a one-way street because of the narrow asphalt coupled with beach parking, particularly beach parking for the Bay Street Beach. And that would run in the opposite direction of 2nd and 1st Street. And the report says access is easily accommodated through the layout of the 3 streets. So I wondered if you'd comment on that, because I wasn't sure from that report whether you were indicating that this is a good idea or whether you're not sure what would how that one-way street would work.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, on the first one, thank you for that. And we can look for North Shore as a community safety zone through that traffic calming policy to look at that area for that. But for the one-way streets, I just wanted in that report to say I do believe that it is easy to accommodate that request because somebody can travel west and someone can travel east within a short distance of each road being one way. But I didn't propose it going forward in this traffic bylaw update because of a commitment that we had made to you that we would look at all the streets in that area and then decide their use and their need and then moving forward. So I thought it might be a little short-sighted to look at that one neighborhood without looking at the other areas, including Perkins and Albert and that section as well.
Okay, thank you. I have a few more questions, Mr. Mayor. So on that note, I am really glad to see that staff will be considering the cottage area, but I think depending on workload, I suppose, but I think it's only fair to look at cottage areas throughout the municipality. There are cottage areas in Port Elgin and Gobles Grove, which have similar types of issues, I think. And so I wondered if that is possible, or if it pertains to all cottage areas, or if your intention was simply Southampton for 2022.
Thank you, sir. We had originally thought just Southampton, but when we put out the request for proposals, we can include all 3 areas for sure. And then we can make them different sections and based on price, move forward with what we can afford in 2022 and then carry the other ones through the year after if necessary.
Okay, thank you. One last question on stop signs, and this is something I've sent already, but I know that some residents who live in the area of Bay and Lake would like to see a stop sign at the intersection of Bay and Lake to stop traffic driving west toward the lake. That there are, it's sometimes difficult to see if you're turning right. There's a lot of congestion, a lot of parking on Lake Street, people going to the Bay Street beach, and I'm making a request for staff to look at that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Mayette next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too have compiled a number of questions / concerns regarding this report. And I'll start off by saying I was eagerly anticipating the traffic report. We waited a long time for the traffic study to be done, and we all had ideas of where modifications were required. And when I read this, quite frankly, I was shocked at the extent to which this has gone. First off, making the whole town a 40-kilometer zone. I mean, I've been driving for over 40 years, and 40-kilometer zones have, in that entirety of that time, been reserved for school zones. So essentially, what we're doing is we're making all of the urban streets, with the exceptions that are listed, into a school zone for Port Elgin and Southampton. And that's just, I mean, in this day and age when vehicles are safer than they have ever been, brake technology, collision warning systems, collision avoidance radar, cars are more safe than ever. And we're taking it in the opposite direction, and we're taking everything that was at 50 and lowering it to 40. And I mean, if we had had a rash of incidents of pedestrians being struck by cars or bicycles being struck by cars, you'd say, okay, well, this is warranted. But to me, this is crazy, going to 40 kilometers an hour for the entire town. All this is going to do is frustrate drivers, because there are people who will drive at 39.9 kilometers per hour on city streets when people need to get places. This is, I can't believe that we're even considering that. And you know, for Amanda's sake, Amanda, I'm going to put all these in an email and send them to you so that you can compile responses. Second is Green Street. Green Street has for the 25 years, and I presume longer, 25 years that I've been living in this town, has been the collector street taking people to the beach without having to stop at a stop sign. And now that concept has been universally accepted for I presume many decades. And you know, because of a couple of complaints we had and some traffic counts during specific times of the year, we're going to have 2 stop signs, and we're going to take that. So there's no way to get down to the beach area without having, you know, we're turning it into Mill Street or River Street or one of the other streets that goes down to the lake. We're just negating the purpose of having Green Street as the major collector street. I disagree with those 2 stop signs. Concession 6, the road I live on. I identified during the preliminary discussions around this that the transition from 40 to 80 was against what was in the recommendations. But to make it 60 for another 1.25 miles, 2.2 kilometers, all the way to the next concession road past Mill Creek, that's just nuts. That's a county road. That's a country road. It has no business. There's no warrant for making it 60 kilometers all the way to side road 1314. That too is going to frustrate drivers. I've been speaking to a few of my neighbors about this, and they can't believe it, that we're going to stretch a 60 kilometer zone all the way out. Now, we did have a resident speak to us about her kids feeling unsafe in the 80 kilometer zone there. That, you know, there's many people, myself included, my kids stood at the end of the driveway in an 80 kilometer zone for the bus for the entire time that they were going to school. And if you buy a house on an 80 kilometer zone, then you have to accept the fact that you've bought a house in an 80 kilometer zone. You can't expect the town to change the speed limits because you requested it. If we want to have a transition, a proper transition from the 40 to the 80, have a couple hundred yards, extend it to where the urban development is going to be, or maybe to the top of the first hill, have it go from 40 to 60 for a couple hundred yards, and then transition back up to 80 where it's supposed to be on that road. But to take it all the way for 2.2 kilometers to the next side road is complete overkill, and is going to have the same effect that I talked about earlier. It's going to frustrate drivers, because that is a major connector road. That's a commuter road. People that are heading to points east from Port Elgin, they come in, they turn there, and they go east. If they've got to go at 60 kilometers an hour all the way to the next, it's going to cause unsafe driving habits. People are going to be passing people. It's just going to cause major frustration. You know, we talk about making things simpler, but on concession 10, we're going to be adding 3 different speed zones: a 40, a 60, and let me pull up the thing here. A 40 changes to a 60, and then back down to a 50. How is this going to make things simpler? People are going to be confused. Which zone am I in? Am I in a 60? I'm in a 40? I can't, you know, where does it change from one to the other? You know, consistency is the key to keeping people within the rules of the law. If you start changing zones one to the other around, it's going to cause confusion. People are going to get tickets, and they're going to take them to court, and they're going to use that picture as their justification. There's too many changes. I didn't know what zone I was in. This, you know, some of the rules, we heard questions earlier from Councillor Grace and Councillor Matheson about, you know, cottage areas and certain school areas, and that's wonderful, because certainly there's a lot of people down there this time of year. Those streets are packed. Is there any consideration being given to having seasonal areas, change the speed limit during the summertime when it's packed with people, but in October and November and March, April, and May, those streets are very, very lightly used. Only the year-round residents that are down there. So, you know, to change the rules based on one time of year for the 6 or 8 weeks that we get of summer period that are going to last the whole year round, I think it unfairly burdens the residents who live here on a full-time basis to accommodate people who are here just for the summertime. My next is signs. Having all these changes and putting all these zones in, school zones and safety zones, and changing our overall speed limits, there's going to be a lot of signs have to be changed. How much have we budgeted for changing out all of the speed limit signs, adding stop signs, adding posts, and adding? This has got to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of capital to put signs in. Those signs I know are not cheap. We talked about the couple $1,000s just to change concession 4 to the 60-kilometer zone. And the timetable, are we talking, you know, it's today is the 9th of August. And my question was, because the report did not talk about what is the timetable for the implementation of this, but I heard you say as you were presenting it that September the 13th, this is going to all come back as a recommendation for us to vote on. And the only way for the public to have input on this is to look you up on the directory and send you an email. I don't think this is adequate public consultation. This is going to affect a lot of people in their basic life. And they don't even know this is coming. Unless they've paid attention to this, unless the media picks up on it today, having a little over a month of consultation period and relying on people to write emails, I think is inadequate. And I think we're going to get a lot of blowback from that. I think something as major as this, that is going to affect people directly in their lives, needs to have an open house, virtual or otherwise. It needs to have an opportunity for people to digest these changes, come back and see how it's going to affect their lives, and have a period to comment. This is not something we want to rush through. And like I said, that is the end of my questions or my comments. And I will put those in an email to you, Amanda, so that you do have time to address them. I don't expect you to do that off the top of your head. But suffice to say, I have some serious concerns, and I'm quite shocked at the extent that we're going here. In this day and age, where drivers are safer than ever, vehicles are safer than ever, I can't remember if we've ever injured or hurt a pedestrian. God hope that we do not. I don't think it's a problem that is out there. If we'd had a rash of incidents, then you'd say, okay, well, this, close calls, incidents, all we're getting is people calling in and saying people are driving past my house too fast, and the speed we're going, you got to come down and see it. I mean, lots of people who sit on the verandas and watch the cars go by think they're going too fast. And, I'm not going to go into the age brackets of people that complain that way, but it's, people with more time on their hands tend to be the ones that are doing this. People who are working public, who have to get places and have to commute around the town, in or and about or through the town, need to be able to do it with some efficiency and not have to stop at all the stop signs, and not have to have too many stop signs to stop at, I should say, and it should not have to wade through low speed limit zones for what I think is a perceived problem. It's not a real problem. And I'll finish off by saying, on August the 15th, we are calling a special police service board meeting where we will be looking at this and trying to get a police perspective on it, because the police and the chief of police are the ones who are going to be charged with enforcing these new rules and new lower speed limits and transition speed limits. And they're the ones that are going to go to court when people get tickets for these things and challenge them. And they're the ones that are going to be monitoring the stop signs. And so I want to make sure that the police, through the police board, gets a chance to really analyze this and give an opinion as a board as to whether we're going in the right direction or not, or whether we're going to be adding additional burden onto our police force. The police force numbers are skyrocketing. As our municipality grows, the number of incidents on a monthly basis is going up, year over year, month over month. And to add this layer of enforcement on an already burdened police force is absolutely going to have an effect. And we need to consider that. We need to consider, do we want our police officers enforcing essentially a school zone through our entire town? Or do we want them out there catching people who are doing crimes, human trafficking, drug trafficking, those types of things, which are real and happening every day in our community? So on the 15th of August, if any public would like to join in that meeting or view that meeting, it is a public meeting, and it will be done both in person and with a Zoom link. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, thanks. Maybe Amanda, a couple of things out of that. Could you make a comment on, so of course this is all of this is based on more than just sitting on the veranda. There's a fair bit of detailed work goes into determining whether any of these actions are warranted or not under the Transportation Master Plan. And so I just wonder if you could talk about two things that come out of Councillor Mayette's comments. One, consultation, what you intend, what the extent of consultation has been on these things and what it will be leading into whenever you want to bring the bylaw forward. And two, well, I guess sort of connected to that, have you consulted already with police services? I know that accidents are part of the calculation of the warrants in many of these cases. And so I assume that police services have been involved in this conversation. So maybe you could make some comments about who has been consulted, what opportunities there have been for consultation, and what opportunities there will be for consultation.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For consultation, many of these recommendations are coming from the Transportation Master Plan, like you alluded to, which was done over 3 years with 3 public information centers, I believe. And then I presented that report to council last year and brought forward each of the policies, the stop sign request policy, the speed limit sign policy, and the traffic calming policy for council's consideration. And now I'm implementing those policies with this. So this is that last step of bringing forward what we promised we would do in each of those pieces. We sent out a news release last week for this meeting so people could come and watch. We did Facebook and Twitter posts. I've received 25 emails to date on some requests for other intersections, and some in support and some not in support of the proposed changes. With that, we're going to do another news release saying, have your comments in for Friday, September 3rd. My phone number is on the website. I'm extension 119, but I can add that onto that news release, and we'll post a couple more times on Facebook to get the comments to come back for these changes when we bring them back to council. And when it comes to police services, yes, all these changes I went through with the chief of police, I went through our bylaw officer, and I went through our operations manager as well, so that we could determine where the ones would be difficult and which ones would be easy to do. The uniform 40-kilometer was one that Chief Zettel was in support of because, for example, currently Bricker Street has 3 different sections with different speed limits. So it goes 40, 50, 40, and it's hard to enforce when you can't remember which section of Bricker you're on. So we went and talked through the town that way. More communication with police services is absolutely encouraged, and see if there's any other things coming forward. But we do that every year for both traffic and parking bylaw updates.
Okay, thank you. Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Amanda, first of all, I wanted to say thank you. This has been, you say, a 3-year process and 3 public engagements, and it's been a long one. And but I just want to commend you for the great work. I agree with most of what's in the report. There's a couple of things I don't necessarily agree with, but I think for the most part, I agree. I think one thing that's important, I think, for us to realize as our population grows is there's definitely going to be additional traffic on Saugeen Shores roads, and anything we can do, I believe anyways, to make our streets safer for pedestrians and cyclists, and if that means 4-way stops and lowering speed limits in certain areas, then I certainly will be supportive of those changes. I did have a few questions posed to me from members of the public, Amanda. The first one was McNabb Street, Highway 21. And I talked to you earlier about this today, but just for the benefit of the public, that is a difficult intersection to get across, and particularly with now Summerside, not Summerside, but the new housing development in Southampton being constructed. That's going to get even, busier, that intersection, no doubt. We talked today, a little bit about, maybe lighting that section or a roundabout. Can you just make comment, Amanda, about the benefits of traffic signals, if it's even doable, whether the warrants warranted it? I wasn't sure. Or if you can talk a little bit about the potential for a roundabout at that intersection, which I support. I think it would be good for that intersection. You comment on that, please?
Sure, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, the Transportation Master Plan took into account the development of Southampton Landing when they did the traffic signal analysis to see if we could get traffic signals at McNabb and Highway 21. And it's not, the warrant isn't met, so we wouldn't be able to get that agreement with MTO. So they suggested back that we look at the roundabout option. So there's the Class EA process that we would follow to do that in that intersection. It still needs to go through MTO approval, but it would be a much easier process to follow, and that could be used at any of the intersections that we wanted to look at, but McNabb for sure was recommended at that time. So that's, again, one of my projects that's in the 2022 budget proposal.
Perfect, thank you. And that would be something I certainly will be supporting, pending a cost, of course. And I don't know what the cost is for roundabout versus traffic signals, but I think we're spending around $400,000 at Ivings. Can you give us a ballpark figure, a guesstimate at all, Amanda, what the comparison figures are for roundabout versus traffic signals like Ivings Drive?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I know they're more expensive to construct, but they're cheaper to operate. So the life cycle cost of a roundabout is cheaper than traffic signals. But I don't have a current number for you. I can reach out and find one for you.
And you'll have that for budget anyways, so appreciate that.
I will.
In Southampton at Foodland corner, Turner Street and Highway 21, my understanding that there has been an intersection assessment done there, Amanda, and can you just comment? I know it's a Bruce County, I guess that would be a Bruce County driven intersection, is that correct? And can you bring us up to date on where that might be at or not?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I spoke with Miguel from the county last week or 2 weeks ago, and he said the traffic counts were underway and the study was progressing. So the work is being done currently at that intersection. I believe council asked for the traffic counts to be done in July, so they should be wrapped up now.
And that's a county project, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. The letters that council has been receiving with Huron Street, no parking from Huron to Albert Street on both sides, and parking from Huron Street easterly up towards up on South Street. Can you just I think we talked a little bit earlier about South Street, but can you just refresh my memory again, Amanda, for the benefit of their residents in that area, what we're proposing for Huron Street from South Street to Albert from a no parking perspective?
Sure. Through Mr. Mayor, you're stealing my thunder on my next report, because on the parking bylaw, I have all that update for there. Okay. But we are looking at restricting parking in that area through that bylaw. Yeah.
Thank you. The last comment I wanted to make was about Lamont Sports Park. And one question I have, you mentioned, Amanda, that to reduce from 80 to a 60, you can only reduce by 20 kilometers per hour. I wasn't realizing that was the case, but is that what you were saying, that when you're making traffic speed limit changes, you can only reduce by 20 kilometers per hour? And where does that come from again? Who makes that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is part of the Highway Traffic Act and Ontario traffic standards. So you're right in that section. We're looking at going to a 60. Past the sports park, but so across the future employment lands would be 60, but the entrance at the sports field would still be 40.
Right. Was there consideration, I've just taken a look at numbers there with 4 lighted ball fields and 400, 500, 600 cars in there every night between 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock, making that left-hand turn and right out, a little bit of a blind spot on the ravine there. Is 30 kilometers at what point can we consider perhaps a 30 kilometer zone for in the sports park area, or can that be a consideration? I wasn't sure.
Through Mr. Mayor, the 30-kilometer zone really needs to be reserved for areas where you have high pedestrian, cyclist, vehicle usage. So when you think of North Shore, they're narrow lanes. The path was made it worse so that the pedestrians and the cyclists are much closer. So that's more of the area where a 30-kilometer is appropriate. The 40 is what I would recommend from the sports field. We do have a traffic impact study that accounts for the volume of the traffic from the recreational stuff, and they looked at whether left turn lanes and that are required on concession 6.
Again, any of these can be revisited. It's a bylaw update, but going from a 40 to a 30 at Lamont Sports Park at the entranceway, that's something that if we determine when the park opens up and it's a 40, and we determine that, hey, there's some serious things happening out there with fender benders and collisions, that we can revisit it, of course, correct?
That's correct.
And the last question I have, Amanda, when you say you can go from an 80-kilometer zone to a 60-kilometer zone, you can only do 20 kilometers at a time. At what point we determine that the 60 isn't the right number, that it really should have been 50? Is that the next bylaw update, or is that something that can be revisited at any time?
Through Mr. Mayor, every time we change the speed, it needs to be a bylaw update. Otherwise, it's not enforceable. But if it was a 50, then we would have to add a 70 before the 80.
Okay.
So
Gotcha. Again, thanks for your good work, and I know it's been a tremendous amount of work, and we're making some progress here. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments from members? I don't see any. I guess a couple of comments in from me. So it's important to talk about the context here. So the town of Saugeen Shores has done a comprehensive review of traffic through our transportation master plan. We've looked at the entire community. We've had public consultation and then a sort of a scientific look at traffic across the municipality as part of that, come up with a comprehensive approach. And now we're implementing that approach. And I think it's important. So from now on, decisions, whether it's speed limits or stop signs or community safety zones or you name it around traffic, aren't going to be political decisions. They're not going to be a gut decision from the Director of Infrastructure and Development. They're going to be based on a detailed set of criteria where we look at the specific situation and we decide, does this make sense? Is this right from a traffic standpoint or not? And that's how this should be done. You cannot set speed limits politically, because that's how people get hurt. And you can't decide a stop sign's needed in a place for political reasons, because that could make the intersection more dangerous. You need to use science, and you need to look at it technically, and you need to make a technical decision. And that's what we are doing here. All of this that's before us has been run through those things that we approved in the transportation master plan, those processes, and now they're here, and it's been determined that they make sense. And where things don't make sense, they're not being recommended. So I think that's a really solid approach, one that I support, one that we should not deviate from going forward, because I think it will make for safer streets. And so in that spirit, I guess the one, and I would just like maybe Amanda, you could speak to it, because it seems weird, and Councillor Mayette raised it, and I looked at it too and thought it's weird. Concession 10, 40 to 60, and then cross the highway back to 50, relatively short sections of road. Why does that work? Like, why does that make sense? Because it seems driving it like you would not necessarily know that was what you were supposed to be doing, and it seems an odd fluctuation in speed limits. Like, oh, so could you explain that a bit more detail to me?
Sure, thank you. The current speed limit has an 80 at the highway towards the lake, and then it goes to the 40. So we want to change that at the trail location so that it is farther up the road to make that trail crossing safer. And then the 60 carrying forward, because we're going to have it as part of a cycling route. I did talk to Chief Zettel about having the 60 carry all the way along Dahl Side Road, and because of the police driveway entrance onto the highway and the commercial driveways there, he was really supportive of remaining that or keeping it as a 50 to that piece there. So Chapel Side Road is sort of where the gravel pits are as well. So that section stays 50 for the gravel pits, the police station, and Mackenzie. And then we wanted all of concession 10 west of the highway to be at a slower speed limit for Bruce Street's going to come out there as well, and the trail crossing.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that. I guess one other update. I've had a lot of questions from members of the public about County Road 17, where it transitions from Gustavus Street out, crossing the Mill Creek Bridge and heading out past West Links, and about the speed through there. It's an 80 zone until you hit Gustavus at the moment. And the county, I would just, it's a county responsibility, not a town responsibility, but I just point out the county is looking at that section of road because for the same reason that Amanda's looked at so many of these, because we need to go to a 20-kilometer-an-hour differential rather than that 30-kilometer-an-hour differential. So some changes are in the offings there. They had suggested initially 70 from side road 1819 down to the bridge, but some further discussion suggested that might be too fast and a 60 might be more appropriate. So it's back and being reviewed. So I just wanted to make that note because a lot of people in this context of this have asked me about that section of road. So if any of them are listening, I wanted to make that point. But beyond that, I don't have anything. So thanks, Amanda, for all the work that you've done on this. And I have read the recommendation. So if there's nothing further, I will ask all in favor. Opposed? That is carried. Okay, so that moves us then on to the staff report on the parking bylaw update and the director.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Every year we receive requests to change parking within the town. So through discussions with community services, bylaw, and operational staff, as well as the police, these requests are considered. There are also recommendations in the Transportation Master Plan and to align with the community safety zones to provide more safety around the schools. So that's the no stopping zones that are being proposed at the elementary schools. This will help to reduce congestion in front of the schools and provide a safer path of travel for the students walking to school. Parking at the South Street Beach access is an area that staff were approached by residents to review, and the piece that we really considered was the safety of the pedestrians walking down South Street. So we recognize that there are people parking farther up South Street and more visitors to that section. So we are looking at changing the parking so that it's only allowed on one side of the street, and that will open up the shoulder on the north side of South Street to allow for the pedestrians to leave their parked vehicles and get down to the beach and back. We also looked at Huron from South Street to Albert, and there's a bend, a trolley stop, and when you do the 10 meters from each intersection, it's really a limited amount of parking that meets that intent. So we're looking at prohibiting it on both sides to allow for an easier maneuverability and a more efficient flow of traffic through that section of Huron Street. And finally, we had requests for electric vehicle parking spaces. So the museum is looking at funding 2 spaces, and they would like to have 2 dedicated on Victoria Street. So we're recommending those to go ahead.
Okay, so we have a recommendation that council that council pass a bylaw to amend the parking bylaw, and we'll take questions or comments on it. The deputy mayor and then the vice deputy mayor, and then Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Thank you, Amanda. I really like the museum's idea of putting a couple electric parking spots there. I think we need more of those throughout town. I think there should be some at Walmart, some at the liquor store plaza, and I think there should be 2 accessible ones for people at the Plex. As we know, electric vehicles are going to become more and more accessible to people. There's more and more on the roads. We see them all the time, and the more charging stations we have, once we look at how we're going to pay for them and how they're charged, I think those are great ideas. My one question I have is the change in the distance from corners back, is that throughout all of the town? So I could say we're going down Market Street at every corner. If we're backing up, we're going to put a sign saying no parking from here to the corner. Is that on all streets, or is that just on the ones you mentioned?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't have to sign everything that's in the parking bylaw, but it does mean that at every intersection, 10 meters will be no parking, and from a signalized intersection, it's 15.
Thank you. I've received many calls this summer, because we have so many people in town, the parking. We know the construction at the corner of High Street and Huron Street has been very busy. It makes a lot of sight lines very inaccessible. But I know I've also got calls from people in Port Elgin saying, can we get a sign so that when I go to pull out onto the street, I can't see because people have parked right to the corner. So as long as we get this put out there, get some signs put up, and it becomes known by everybody, I think that will help in sight lines and help prevent any accidents that could occur. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and again, thank you, Amanda, for your great work on this one. And my apologies for being a little premature with my question during the speed limit discussion. And it's good to see South Street prohibited on the north side. That was a request coming from the residents as well, and I think that's a good change. And parking prohibited on both sides of Huron Street. That's a bit of a dangerous bend there, and that's a nice change. And the question I was leading to earlier, Amanda, I left part of my question to now was north of Albert Street. That still remains parking on one side of the road, and that would be on the northwest side, correct?
The parking that is there today remains north of Albert Street. I believe it's on the northwest side.
Yeah, nothing changes there. So the residents certainly will appreciate those changes. So that's all the comments I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Amanda, for the report. A follow-up to the comments about South Street beach parking. I think most of us received an email today with concerns about the actual parking area that is adjacent to the beach access, and how some people have concerns about the danger there with people pulling in and pulling out and pedestrians. Is that something we can look at as well?
Thank you, through you, sir. Yeah, I reached out to Jane, and her and I are going to sit down and take a look at what's going on at that parking lot and what it means.
Terrific. Two more questions. The report says that the transportation master plan suggests adding no stopping on Waterloo, Stafford, and Gustavus in front of the elementary schools. And so I'm just wondering, are there other areas? I'm sure there are, but if you could just comment on other areas that would be available to parents when dropping off and picking up students.
Thank you, and through. Yes, the no stopping would be at the fronts of those schools. I do agree that there's a lot of people that drop their kids off in those spots, but there are access points to Saugeen Central through walkways to Pearson and the Crescent, whose name is escaping me right now. And then for Northport, there's a walkway on Joseph. There's also, you can walk from Bruce up through the field. I know in the winter, there's not a pathway currently in that section, but we are in discussions with the developer about having a linkage through there when the next stage of Northport Meadows goes forward. So there's drop-offs farther away from the front of the school that could be done. The no stopping is because we have a lot of people that stop and then get out into traffic with their children and cross with in unsafe conditions, and then we have people that are passing on the left through those areas. So the intention is to take that congested area away where the people are crossing and stop that activity of getting kids out into traffic.
Okay, thank you. I just have one more question, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Yep.
And it's relating to the the distances, the no parking sections approaching intersections, the 10 meter and the 15 meter. There are some streets, I know in Southampton and I imagine throughout town, which are shorter, are busy, have businesses, and there's a lot of parking, a lot of cars parked on both sides of the street. I have a request to see if staff would evaluate whether we could paint lines to delineate parking spaces for more efficient parking. We did that on Chantry View earlier in the summer, and I think it's working fairly well. So that's my request for that. Thanks.
Okay, further questions or comments from members? I guess a couple of comments from me. One on the school issue. I think, although I appreciate the direction on no stopping, and that's fine to include, it's unlikely to work. The problem is the schools are just they're not situated or built in a way that works for the 21st century, and no amount of parking restrictions or parking changes is going to fix that. The only thing that's going to fix that are new schools. The schools are too small, and they just don't have enough parking. So I mean that's a point the town of Saugeen Shores. I don't mind making that point here in this forum because we've made it publicly several times before, and there's no question that at both Northport and Saugeen Central and St. Joe's, all three schools in Port Elgin elementary schools, there are parking problems, significant parking problems that put people at risk. But the town can't solve those problems through no stopping signs or any other level of restriction, short of closing the roads. We couldn't stop it. The only thing that will fix that is for the school board to, and the board is on side, so I hate to criticize them really. It's the only thing is the Ministry of Education to build new schools in Port Elgin, particularly public elementary schools. So hopefully they'll get on that. The other question that I have, and it's a minor thing, but I think, and I won't stand in the way of this particular thing, but I think we need some sort of policy on charging stations on the town's property, broader. I really think these are a potential profit center, and municipal lands owned by the town of Saugeen Shores should be used for the benefit of Saugeen Shores taxpayers and not for other organizations. In this case, it's the county, so it's a little bit less offensive. But I think that in future, and I think I agree with the deputy mayor, we need lots more of these. Primarily, I think built by the private sector on private lands. But if there's going to be public charging stations, and I'm sure there will be, and we will install more of them, I know, we should own them if they're on our land, and they should be developed in such a way that they generate profit for the town of Saugeen Shores. So in this case, I'm happy to let this one go, but I would really appreciate, Amanda, if, we need policies on this because there's going to be more of them. There'll be a lot more requests. Hopefully we'll be building a lot more. So let's get a policy together on this and let council decide what it wants to do with its lands when it comes to electric vehicle charging stations. So those are my comments on that. I have read the recommendation. If there's no other comments, all in favor? That's carried. Oh, opposed? Were you? Sorry, carried. Okay, so that moves us then on to the third item, which is a staff report on oversized load and moving permits policy, the director.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. This is an update to our existing policy, and it will enable oversized loads to be moved through town through the use of a licensed escort instead of having a police escort. So permits will still be cleared by myself and Saugeen Shores Police so that we can make sure there's no conflicts with above ground utilities, confirm that traffic control isn't required at any of the streetlights or traffic controlled intersections, and that a police escort's not needed for the load.
Okay, thank you. There's a recommendation that council approve the oversized load moving permits policy. Questions or comments? I think this is a really good one. I've heard plenty of concern over the years from the industry that moves large loads like houses and things through town, that our process is overly cumbersome. So I'm glad to see this change. I think it streamlines it and makes it better. So thanks for this one. If there's nothing further, then all in favor? That's carried. Okay, thank you. So that moves us all the way through to 7.7, communications and petitions for information. 6 items there. Any questions or comments about them? The Vice Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the first piece of correspondence signed by Margaret Devitt, Cole Boulevard in Southampton. She's raised some very good concerns. Some concerns that we're dealing with this evening, in the future will be dealt with, and some that might be a little bit more difficult. There's one item in here I'd like our Director of Community Services to make comment on, and that's about people have been seen cooking dinner at the beach using fires and hibachis, and I personally witnessed this at Audits Grove yesterday, a group of about 10 or 12 people. 2 barbecues, and I guess, Jane, the question is, bylaw enforcement. I think we have 1 full-time employee. Would that be correct? 1 full-time bylaw enforcement officer.
You are correct.
We don't have any seasonal. There's no seasonal 8, 10, 12-week seasonal staff that help Mr. Coulier with bylaw enforcement.
No, he is the only bylaw officer we have.
Right. So, in defense of Mr. Coulier, Ron, I mean, he can't be everywhere. Maybe it was a day off. He can't. I don't think he works 7 days a week. He probably works 5 days a week. So it's hard for him to be. That a few people raise concerns, about the barbecuing that's happening on our waterfront. And as Devitt has just mentioned about the cooking, she sees it frequently. And Jane, it's not permitted, correct?
You are correct. And if I may add, our bylaw officer has been diligent in warning and giving out tickets this summer to those who are not abiding by those, whether it's dogs on the beaches or barbecues on the beaches and tents as well. So certainly doing a great job and attempting to keep on top of that, given the 18 kilometers of beach that he's monitoring. And that is the issue. I mean, there's 18 kilometers of beach and 1 person. And I just wonder, as hopefully if water levels continue to go down a little bit and we gain more beach. I mean, I know down on Edge Grove here, we've got 30 more feet of beach this year. That's pretty significant in some sections of beach, and the cars, are lined up in that particular section. And Port Algon Beach is busy, and I'm sure Southampton is busy as well. And as more visitors find their way to Saugeen Shores, it's going to bring these kinds of situations. And I spoke to a friend of mine who was, vacationing over in Aurelia just a week ago, and they paid $50 to park, $50 to park as a tourist. And I think Sauble Beach is $30, $40, and Goderich is $20, $30 to park in certain areas. Mr. Mayor tonight mentioned maybe we should be taking a look at that, and strategically, where should we be looking at some. Unless I misunderstood what you're saying, Mayor Luke, but strategic is thinking about paid parking in certain areas. But as we get busier, Jane, I'm just wondering between you and Phil Eagleson, and who's I think Ron reports to Phil, is that should we be considering a couple of summer students to work alongside Ron Coulier to give him a hand next year? Or 1 person even, for 8 or 10 weeks. It's a heavy workload for 1 person. We're a tourist town. We're seeing an increasing number of people visit our community, and there are some bylaws being broken. We can't catch all the infractions. I'm just wondering if it's a little too much for 1 person. So that's just a thought, Jane, and you and Phil could think about, and something for budget maybe we can discuss, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Sure. Just to clarify, I didn't say anything about paid parking. Don't support paid parking.
I misunderstood that. I misunderstood your point then. Sorry.
Just so the letters don't come at me tomorrow over that. Anyway, who did I have next? Did I have somebody next? I think, oh yeah, Councillor Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too read the letter from Mrs. Devitt, and she makes a lot of good points. This summer, we're seeing more people on our beaches than ever. I mean, it's been a warm summer. Today was particularly warm. And there's no doubt in my mind that this is as a result of what our neighboring municipalities have done with their parking permits, going from $15 to $30 a day up in Saugeen Beach. It doesn't take rocket science to figure out what's going to happen after they go up there and realize they can park down here for free, and our beaches are as nice or better than theirs are. We have a lot of bylaws. We passed a bunch of new bylaws about tents and barbecues on the beach, as the Vice Deputy Mayor just alluded to. And quite frankly, they're a joke. Nobody abides by them. I'm not saying that our bylaw officer isn't doing his job, but I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying he's doing the best that he can, but he's only got 40 hours a week. He's only working Monday to Friday, 8 to 4 or whatever his hours are. And let's face it, from 4 p.m. till 9 p.m., what time is that? That's barbecue time. That's right. That's when people come up with the barbecues. That's when people take the dogs to the beach and throw a ball. I get more comments from people about our bylaws in this town just being, who cares? They're just a joke. And I mean, the same can be said for the new speed limits we're going to be putting in. New laws and bylaws and speed limit signs don't change behaviors. People are going to do what people do. And people are going to go to the beach, and we're going to have more and more people, more and more out-of-towners. I had an incident just last week where it was brought to my attention somebody was on the beach with their dog, and on the main beach. They're not talking about a remote beach, on the main beach. They were an out-of-towner. They were here, and they just didn't know. And so they were approached by a resident and said, by the way, do you know there's no dogs allowed on the beach? And they were like, yeah, so what? I didn't see anybody enforcing it. You can give me a ticket. So they just flaunt it, right? People are going to do what they do. We're going to see more and more people as every municipality, I believe it's every municipality with the exception of maybe one or two, and we're the one, has paid parking. And I'm not by any means making this into an advocacy for paid parking. I'm not. But humans will be humans, and human nature will say you go to the place that's the cheapest. And $30 is not chump change for a day's parking with your family. That's a matter of paying for your lunch or not. And so we're seeing, as this letter alludes from Ms. Devitt, we're seeing more and more people coming down and parking wherever they want. Saugeen Beach has very, very strict parking bylaws, and summer students are not the ones. Summer students will not work, Mr. Vice Deputy Mayor. You can't get a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old kid to try and break up a barbecue party or tell somebody to get their dog off the beach. It's just, you can't expect a kid to do that. What they do over in Saugeen Beach is they hire the kids from the college who are in law enforcement course. This is right up their alley. That's the type of people you need to supplement your bylaw. And we do need that. We need that a lot because people are parking wherever they want to. People are going on the beaches and doing whatever they want to. People are flaunting the laws because they don't see any consequences. And unfortunately, that's what we've got ourselves into. And I think that by adding new layers of laws without the ability to enforce them, we're just going to see more and more of that flaunting. So I feel for Ms. Devitt, but unfortunately, the situation she describes, I think, is only going to get worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's important to remember that we do have the ability to enforce our bylaws. We have one bylaw enforcement officer, but we also have a $4.5 million police service with over 20 police officers. And we're the only municipality in Bruce County that has one of those. South Bruce Peninsula doesn't have one, which is why they have to hire Georgian College students. But we don't have to do that. We have a lot of police constables, and they do excellent work. And I tell you, if you're out doing things on the beach that you shouldn't be doing, or doing any other things that you shouldn't be doing in this town, you're likely to encounter either Ron Coulier or one of our many very capable police officers. And the one thing I have heard throughout the pandemic, particularly on our beaches, is that our bylaws, provincial regulations, et cetera, are extremely well enforced, not only by our police officers, but also by our auxiliary officers and our special constables. So I think the public should have good confidence that all of the laws, provincial, federal, and local, will be enforced in the town of Saugeen Shores. So, are there any other questions or comments on any of these pieces of correspondence? If not, then we'll move on to item 9, reports of department heads. And the first one is an information report on the return to in-person meetings, and the clerk.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So this report considers the option to move back into in-person meetings. It seeks council's input into the timing and the method of returning to these in-person meetings. There are a couple of options outlined in the report. Option 1, for example, will use a wide-angle camera, similar to our method that we used pre-COVID. Option 2 proposes to continue to use Zoom to provide a close-up view of the council members and the presentation, and that's for the benefit of our viewers at home. Both options will allow the participants to participate remotely using Zoom. So that's our open forum, delegations, maybe even staff members can participate remotely. I do want to note that both of these options are quite viable. With respect to the timing, if council so wishes to return to in-person meetings, staff are suggesting returning no sooner than the September 13th meeting, keeping in mind that the timing of the transition out of step 3 may be a factor or will likely be a factor to take into consideration. So I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to hearing council's comments and just to help us determine how best to proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. So we're keen to hear from members of council about, first off, I guess, your comfort level with returning on September the 13th, and then your views on some of these options for how we might hold our meetings. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask Linda a couple of questions first, just to clarify some of the points that she made. One of the pros that she mentioned in terms of, or I should say a con that she mentioned for the current all Zoom meeting is that it costs us extra to hire an additional staff person to monitor the Zoom meeting. So with that in mind, if we go back to in-person meetings, and we have them in Rotary Hall to preserve social distancing requirements if they are required. Will we need more staff and material resources? And will we have the technology to approximate the quality of what's available to the public right now during a Zoom meeting?
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor. So if we move back into the Rotary Hall and we continue with Zoom, we will still need that one additional member from the clerk's department to monitor the Zoom meeting. If COVID protocols are still in place where we have to have members of the public sign in and we have to enforce the physical distancing component of that, we may very well need the third person, at least to begin with, to do the monitoring for the COVID, especially if we were going to have members of the public come to the podium and make their presentations. We want to make sure that we are able to keep them safe through COVID protocols. So there may be an additional one staff member required if we move up to the Rotary Hall. With respect to technology, we will have the technology available. We made great improvements to the Rotary Hall. There will be less setup that's required. We got a lot of the IT hardwired now. If it's determined that it works better that members of council have 2 screens, there may be additional cost for that. We have looked at the microphones and we've got that in place. So no additional cost for the microphones other than what's already been spent. If we do have a requirement for any member of council to have that second screen, we are looking at an option whereby we have a multi-purpose device that we can use for the voting kiosks as we move into the 22 election. So we'll have cost savings because we're going to have a multi-purpose device. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment. I was considering, the pros and cons of meeting in person. Certainly, I think there's something to be missed by not being able to meet in the same room with colleagues, with constituents, with staff. I have a concern though, because of the Delta variant, which is now the dominant strain of COVID in Ontario. And we are being told that it is more contagious than the original strains or that other strains, and that fully vaccinated people they know who are symptomatic. They know spread this to or can spread this to others. I think the jury's still out on whether asymptomatic people who have the Delta variant can do that. But I understand the American CDC is determining that. So yesterday, Ontario reported over 400 new cases of COVID-19 for the first time since mid-June. And I believe that there is an upward trend in this. So even if all participants in an in-person meeting are fully vaccinated, I'm assuming it would not be a good thing if we were wearing masks in terms of visibility for the public, audibility, clear audio. So those are my concerns with that. I also want to say, though, that our staff has been consistently very careful and cautious throughout the entire pandemic in developing policy that's consistent with provincial and federal standards. And I am confident that whatever decision you make will be done very, very carefully. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Further comments from members? Councillor Carr. You're still muted there. You're still muted. Oh, there you go. Wait a sec. Coming off. Okay. I can't hear you, Matt. Hey, Matt, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. I don't know why. It doesn't show you muted on the screen, but for some reason, we can't hear you. Why don't we'll give Matt a second to connect. Is there anybody else who has a comment that you want to make? Well, Matt.
Sorry, is it working there now?
There you go. Hey, Matt, we got you.
It keeps on. It's got a thing telling me to leave the meeting right now. I'll leave it up so you can hear me. Sorry, I guess my only comment on it was I support getting back to in-person meetings as soon as we can. Myself, I myself miss the in-person. I enjoy the networking that goes on with it, and myself. I guess a little question just to sidetrack on that one first. When it comes to our options A or B there, from the widescreen to individual cameras, I mean, I'd support the individual cameras if we can just do cameras without audio, if we can still maintain our mics to maybe avoid some of that backfeed that was mentioned in the downsides of it. And if not, I mean, with the wide view, but I'm curious, like, what are our numbers of people watching? Is it something that we're only trying to make 10 or 15 people see, or is it something that we're talking of hundreds of people watching? Like, I myself don't think we're seeing huge numbers being viewed. Is it something that's that much of a concern, or I guess that's kind of what I want to hear. Linda, sorry, I can't see anybody right now either. I might have to leave the meeting and come back, see if it resets.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councillor Carr, we can hear and see you, so that is good. Unfortunately, I don't have the statistics with me. I know the Deputy Clerk has the statistics, but I can let you know that it's been a while since we've had 100 of viewers. We certainly have, I would say probably around that, anywhere between the 5 to 15 kind of on a regular basis. And it obviously depends on the topic. So the more contentious the topic, the higher viewing rating we have. But I can confirm that we've been able to handle all volumes at this point in time. And the Deputy Clerk lets me know that right now we have 34 viewers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Give them all the wave.
Thanks.
The deputy is not just waving, he has a question. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I like the hybrid model that we discussed earlier, where if some members aren't comfortable coming in, they can do it from home. I like the Zoom, but also believe, Mr. Mayor, as you said earlier, we do need that second screen, one that is focused on us, because as we go right now, we have our agenda pulled up on one, and to be watching the screen on the other, you really can't do that. But it is important to be, as Councillor Grace has just mentioned, we have to be monitoring what's happening with the COVID situation. Numbers are fluctuating, and once we get to the stage 4, I believe, of opening, we'll have a better idea. But September is going to be a difficult month for a lot of things. So I'm open to coming back, but as the clerk said, we'll follow the public health direction on that.
Okay, are there further comments? I think it's important just to be clear. I mean, there's no restriction that would prevent council from meeting together right now. In terms of public health restrictions, we could today, and probably will be able to in September. I guess the key thing that we need to hear from members to an extent is if there are strong objections to moving in that direction or concern from members about doing that, I think because we can, and public health, there's no public health guideline preventing it. And we just, whenever we do it, maybe September's too soon. We want to do October or whatever. I don't know, but if I guess maybe the better way to put it is that at the moment we're heading towards the September 13th date, and maybe I'll put it this way: if nothing changes between now and then in terms of public health protocols or restrictions, then we'll return to in-person meetings on the 13th of September. Jump all over me if you think that that's a terrible idea. Councillor Wyatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I personally am comfortable with moving to in-person meetings as soon as possible. But I do think that it should be mandatory, and I think I'm in common ground here, that everybody who comes to the meeting should be double vaccinated. We should not have anybody who's not willing to take their neighbor's health seriously enough to get vaccinated to be able to come to a meeting. That should be a stipulation.
It's noted, and I'm not sure it's a requirement that we could implement. Maybe the clerk could speak to it. Well, Linda, do you have some comments that you can make about that?
It's my understanding, Mr. Mayor, that we cannot ask if somebody is vaccinated or double vaccinated.
So I think it's important for council to be clear that if we do have in-person meetings, that we will have to do so with some protocols to protect each other and protect the public on the premise that some people who arrive may not be vaccinated. That's a risk. That is one of the risks of meeting in person in public meeting and having public meetings. I believe that there will definitely be restrictions in terms of how many people can attend from the public and physical distancing, et cetera, in place, at least as long as public health has got some recommendations there. Yeah. And so anyway, I think, but that's the reality we're dealing with here. So there's no confusion. Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just, I think that if we decide to meet back in person, which, I'd like to get back there someday, I just really believe that we need to have the strictest of the strictest protocol to keep ourselves safe and also those people attending meetings to make sure that they're 100% safe. I just, how we do that, I'm not sure all the procedural things we'll have to do, but we need to get back, but we just have to be 100% certain that, we're protecting ourselves and our neighbors, and the neighbors are protecting their neighbors. Is it really worth it to have someone, become infected at a meeting that we've called for someone coming in that's non-vaccinated? I still do have some concerns about that, and the fact with this fourth wave on the way. But yes, we have to follow health units protocol, but I'm just saying, I hope that's the strictest of the strictest. So we need to go back at some point.
Councillor Grace.
So if we are not allowed to mandate or ask that someone be vaccinated, fully vaccinated, then, I think we have to think about members of our council who are parents of young children who cannot be vaccinated right now because they're not 12, even if they wanted to. And we can see that I'm looking at the news stories out of the US with children being put on ventilators and suffering from the Delta variant. And so is that something that we want? I think we need to be really careful about going back and especially mandating that members of council attend an in-person meeting. I would not approve of that at all, because I think that we need to be able to respect those members of council who have family members who may not be able to be vaccinated for whatever reason, whether they're children or some other health reason. And so I have a real concern about that.
Or grandparents, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, and through you to Councillor Grace. I appreciate those comments very much. I was leading on one of the footnotes in the information report here, which suggested that members of council could, upon, I believe it's 24 hours notice, participate virtually, of which I would intend to exercise that right. I sense the camaraderie and the networking and the pieces that we're all anxious to get back to, but I personally am in no hurry. I found this method to be effective for communication, and it is something that I ironically thought would be useful for young members of council with families prior to COVID being a thing. It's been very beneficial to my life to be able to, have childcare in the home and participate in these meetings. So in addition to your point about my children not being able to be vaccinated at this point, and perhaps others not only on this call as members of the committee, but people who might be interested in participating, I am excited to see the prospect of a virtual participation continuing outside of COVID.
Okay. Thanks for that. So I sense a lot of trepidation among members. I hear Councillor Carr's strong interest in getting back together and some concern from other members. I think Councillor, I'm interested in meeting in person. As I've said several times, it's very lonely here without you. But I do get the concerns of the members who are expressing concern. I think overall, I don't think we want to do a thing that's going to make any member of this committee uncomfortable. I think, or to exclude somebody. Hear Councillor Smith say that she's likely to continue to stay at home. Well, I'm not keen on meeting together in a scenario where some members feel they cannot do that. And sort of we have this permanent separate group of people who are, some are together and some are apart. I think that's probably not the best way to proceed. So, maybe it's best we shelve the idea for the time being and revisit in a month's time. Or maybe in 2 months' time. I'm not sure. We could put this back on the agenda sometime early in the fall, possibly, and discuss it again and see what the situation is. I think that, there's some scenarios where an in-person public meeting is going to be important for us to be able to do for certain decisions and to ensure the public, us meeting in person with the public there's a certain, there's a certain thing that's essential about democracy in that you can't dispense with, and that this doesn't really deliver for the public. So I really think that council meeting in person and sitting in that crucible with the public, breathing down your neck, making a decision is important, and something that I think forces you to think about what you're doing. And so I think we do need to get back there, but I hear this discomfort, and I don't like to do things that are going to make a lot of people on this council uncomfortable. So I think, so why don't I say another thing? Why don't we delay this for 2 months, revisit it in October, and leave it at that? Is that something that is generally acceptable? Okay. Well then, Linda, can we take that as direction?
Yes, we can, Mr. Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so then we'll move on to item 2, an information report on the range light. And I suspect the Director of Community Services will speak to this. The Director.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to bring council up to date that although the work didn't occur in 2020 due to high water levels and strong winds, it impeded the safe working space for staff. As of today, council will see at the top of the range light work happening and proceeding to advance that repair work. The further down of the range light, the lower portion, we continue to have supply chain issues, and I wanted council to be aware of that, but we're looking for a product that is in keeping with the historical significance of the building. I don't want to take Marine Heritage thunder, but they have approved for me to share with council this evening that their fundraising campaign is close to $57,000, which is tremendous. And I thank Marine Heritage and all of those volunteers and those that have donated towards this project. Once it's completed, it's going to be another well photographed location in Saugeen Shores.
Yeah, that's great. $57,000. Congratulations to the Marine Heritage Society. I will get Councillor Grace and then Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jane, for that report. It's really great news to see the work advancing on the range light. I know you've mentioned the great work of the Marine Heritage Society, and I also want to thank them for their hard work and leadership in the fundraising campaign. I also want to thank Derek Seaman for donating his labor for free. That's really astounding, especially knowing how busy he is. And I want to thank the project manager, I guess that's you, Jane, for making an attempt to keep this facade as original as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. And then Councillor Maya.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to echo Cheryl's comments there too, that, you know, the Marine Heritage Group definitely go above and beyond all the time for this community. Myself, I know a few of the members, and I try to partake in some of their events as they go on, but this is one of those groups that just seems to thrive at fundraising, these wonderful events that they do between the tours to Chantry and paying off loans early. And just a solid shout out to that group for me, for sure, that they do an excellent job. I know I'd asked this question before, Jane. I'm just curious. I know when we were talking this was all aesthetics, correct? There was no structural damage to the lighthouse, correct? Like, as far as I'm saying this because I'm curious as to why the range light still isn't working. I know myself, I was out on the lake about, I'm going to say it was 2 weeks ago now, and myself coming in at dark into the mouth of the river makes it really, really tough without that range light going. I know I had asked that question months ago and I was assured that it was working. Myself, I can say I did come in the river a couple of weeks ago. It is not working. I'm wondering if we can get this addressed again or find out why we don't have that light on.
Yeah, thank you for that. And through you, Mr. Mayor, it certainly was started up working again. So it appears that Coast Guard is having some issues with it, and we're happy to reach out to them and bring that to their attention again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Councillor Maya.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My comments were around the aid and navigation and the operability of the light also. So I'm glad to see it's being addressed. I've heard during our recent derby, we had fishermen coming in or going out early in the morning, and not having those two lights to line up on to bring you straight into the harbor makes it very difficult in what was a very foggy week of fishing.
Sure. Okay. Are there any other comments or questions about this report? Okay. Thanks very much then, Jane. And that moves us then on to, actually Jane's on for this one too, so should just stay there. An information report on Lamont Sports Park update, the Director.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to update council on what we're working on at Lamont Sports Park. We've been attempting to keep both council and the public informed throughout this process. And within the report, it identifies what is included in phase 1. Everything from the 4 diamonds to the gated entrance and seating the remaining open space so that when patrons enter in the ball diamonds, they're not going to be looking at a bunch of stone and rubble. All of these aspects are going to provide an excellent experience for users as they commence play on the diamonds in 2023. As articulated in the 2016 Recreation Master Plan, future phases should be evaluated based on, the diamond utilization, the stakeholder needs, participation rates, and other relevant factors at that future time. But staff is certainly happy with the progress that's happening, and we are looking forward to having users play on these diamonds once they are opened.
Okay, thank you. Questions from members? Vice Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your report, Jane. And you mentioned about the 2016 master plan, and it's good that we are referencing that. One of the comments, one of the statements in the master plan makes about, the need for additional diamonds based on a population growth up to 16,900 people by 2031. To just take into account when we're looking at that report that we're now to go to 20,000 people by 2031. So I think we have made the right decision with this ball complex with the 2 pinwheels of 8 diamonds, and it's a good news story. If anyone in the community hasn't seen the progress going on at Lamont Sports Park right now, I go there regularly on my bike, and boy, it's really coming along nicely. And what a wonderful facility that's going to be for our community. Council did approve phase 2, fundraising strategy committee. Kristen Schreider, Councilor Schreider, has done an excellent job. They've wound up some of their work, and now they're moving on into the next phase of the actual fundraising campaign, and they're itching to get going. And that's a good news story too. They think they're quite able to raise $1 million for the next phase. And Councilor Smith, I want to thank you. I think at the last meeting you said what are we fundraising for, and make sure council approves the amenities for the next phase. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, Councilor Smith. I think you brought to our attention that the fundraising committee, before we turn them loose, council needs to ensure that we give that committee direction what exactly we're fundraising for. So I think that's good planning, and the terms of reference for that fundraising committee are working on amending those, and they'll be back to council. Where council can talk about what the future phase will look like for fundraising. And the striking committee did meet, and they agreed that the terms of reference need to be modified a bit to make sure that when fundraising starts, that they know exactly what they're fundraising for. And I think that report's coming late August, early September. So I wanted to again, it's a good news story, Lamont Sports Park, and the future looks bright, and going to be need for some washroom facilities out there, obviously, and other amenities. So, but the one thing I was hoping tonight, Mr. Mayor, that we could do is send this back to staff for, for just to follow up with this report to flush out a little bit. I know the fundraising committee would like to, move forward as quickly as they can, but it's up to council to decide what the next phase looks like. So I'm hoping that staff, Mr. Mayor, will come back soon with, with a report that outlines what exactly they should be fundraising for. So I hope that would be considered. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think just if I could comment to that, there's a contradiction in where we're at now that we need to reconcile. I mean, as the director, in the director's report, she notes that we have the 2016 master plan talking about evaluating future phases before moving on to evaluating phase 1 before moving on to future phases. Council's made the decision at our last meeting to strike a fundraising committee for phase 2. So that has accelerated that. I mean, council has in effect decided not to wait for that time lag to evaluate phase 1 before moving on to making decisions about phase 2. Having a fundraising committee necessitates that we make some decisions. We have to give them the clarity. We can't send them out into the community to raise money and just have them and have no parameters around that, because they may come back and having raised money for things that council has no intention of building, and that would be devastating for the fundraising committee, for the community, for the whole project. So that can't happen. So the striking committee is sort of stuck at the moment, because we need to have a terms of reference that includes those features that council is willing to build, so we can say to the committee, here's what you can fundraise for, and implicitly or explicitly you can't fundraise for anything else because we don't intend to build anything else. So I think it's important to be clear, and I understand the director's point that the 2016 master plan says, we should wait, evaluate, and then plan. Council has moved past that point. We're now not going to do that. We're going to have a fundraising campaign starting fairly soon in the coming few months, and that's going to require us to decide about at least some of the things that are going to be in phase 2 right now. So we need to get the administration to give us that list of things that potentially starting with what was in the report that the committee chaired by the deputy mayor created, and say, here's what was in that report that could be included in the second phase. Council, which of these things do you want to put in this terms of reference to fundraise for? So we need the administration to do that now. Come back to us with that with that information, so that we can give clear direction to the committee that we have decided to strike. So I hope the director and the CAO will do that work now and return to us with that information. Councillor Mayette, sorry, I saw your hand there and I got talking. Over to you.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for remembering me. I was going to just bring up one point that when I read your report, Jane, about where it says the craft playground equipment was not considered as part of the scope of this landscape planning limited. So I take it from that the money that with $250,000 that we got from the Kraft Heinz project, which was seems like a lifetime ago. It was before COVID, so it was probably 2018 or 19 when we had that tremendous phoning in, or the registering online campaign. And I know I sat for hours and hours myself filling out those things, and it was successful. I'm just wondering, what is our obligation to Kraft Heinz with regards to spending that money? I know any grant application processes that I've been through is, you have a limited time to spend the money, and then you have to you get granted the money, and then you have to do the project, and then you have to submit receipts proving that you did the project, and then you get the money, you get the check at the end of it. Is that a similar process with this, or are we just sitting on this 250 grand? And I would expect that Kraft Heinz is anxious to get their PR work out of it. I would like to see sooner than later. I don't want to see this drag on as long as possible, because we won't even get considered if there's ever another Kraft Heinz project. We keep doing that.
Yes, thank you for your question. It's you, Mr. Mayor. We have received the check. It is in a reserve specifically for the playground equipment. The playground equipment cannot be put in until after the diamonds are done and that construction process has been done. Because the diamonds don't open up till 2023, it makes no sense to proceeding to put in a set of playground equipment that's going to sit dormant for a year. Hence the reason why we'll go through the competitive process during the winter and come up with a selection process late spring with an installation in later fall, so that it is ready and installed once the diamonds are open and playable.
Just a quick supplemental, if I may, Mr. Mayor. I remember when we did all the campaign, I was under the impression that the money was to go towards a baseball complex and that it was going to be used for baseball diamonds. And I think that was what we pitched. But we've since said we're going to now use it for playground equipment, because that wasn't what I believe it was awarded to do.
Well, we do have a couple of members of council that were part of that committee. They may want to respond to that and what the scope of that project was, but it's our understanding it was for the playground equipment to move forward.
The pitch was for accessibility, right, to make the facility accessible. And so an accessible playground seems to fit really solidly inside what was mentioned as part of the campaign, in my view anyway. Vice Deputy Mayor and then the Deputy Mayor.
You're quite correct, Mr. Mayor. Jane, I'm just wondering, not a little bit off topic, but not entirely. We received a few comments from our community about the survey being done for playgrounds in Saugeen Shores, and the accessibility question has been raised with playground equipment for future sites. Will this site, we have a very nice successful playground in Southampton, and now I think this one, Jane, will be deemed an accessible playground, correct? We've used that word, so that it will be an accessible playground similar to, or at least have, some or a lot of the features that a park like Southampton accessible playground has.
So if I may, through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, all of our playgrounds have accessible components in them. They all meet AODA requirements. The playground that will be planned at Lamont Sports Park will be no different. If it's a desire to have it fully accessible, then we certainly can price that out and come back to council through budget deliberations with the request for additional funds to look at additional comments, considerations. And that might be rubberized flooring, which can double the price sometimes. But certainly when we look at the modified wood chips in all of our ball diamonds as an example, those are deemed accessible through the AODA Act.
Okay, I think, the Deputy Mayor, yeah, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you and Jane, Councilor Mayetta asked the question. It makes sense, your explanation of waiting until the diamonds are ready to open. Would it not then make more sense not to put them in the fall, but the spring just before the diamonds do open? Or is there any thought to that?
Yeah, we certainly considered that. It will be dependent too on the growth of the grass and how the root system takes. If the diamonds are in good enough condition, we may consider some minor play occurring in the fall. And if that's the case, then we'd like to have the playgrounds prepared at that point as well.
Okay. My next question is the portalet structures. Is that exactly what I think there? Porta potties down each of the pathways?
Yeah, and we'll look at building a structure over top of them. Those are deemed temporary until a more formal, permanent washroom facility can be considered in a future phase.
Yeah, because that was one of the recommendations of the original committee to purchase a couple of the trailers like we have at Lakeview, a lot cheaper than building and already come pre-designed. So the committee also suggested putting trees down the baselines in those sections for shade and to help with ball travel. But if we're putting a porta potty in there, as long as it's temporary, I don't think we really want to have porta potties down those lanes. I see the access for the connecting past the rail trail. So we'll be having a way for cyclists to come off of the rail trail down into the park.
Correct. Cyclists, pedestrians, and spectators will be able to watch games from that location as well.
Okay. Now where it says the lid basin, the back berm, is that what we're going to try and do? Is grass the back berm going up to the top at the north end of the field, a seating area for people to sit and watch?
Correct. It's a prime location to watch ball games up there, and we are looking at expanding our bench program for the possibility of benches to be along that area as well for spectators to watch games.
Okay. And going by the original committee group, was it not this agreed upon that we put the two pinwheels, if we are going ahead with the second set, 2 diamonds at least, were we not supposed to be putting the 2 pinwheels back to back and then having the parking on the other side rather than pinwheel parking pinwheel?
Yeah, certainly that was part of the original plan when this consultant came on board, and it was deemed the area where the hazard lands did not permit 2 pinwheels being immediately beside one another, and we needed to relocate the road. So the second pinwheel, which is further south, accommodates 2 individual diamonds in between in order to accommodate that road and the hazard lands as well to the east.
So the only problem that I see then is it's the same as coming into Lakeview. Once it starts to get dark and you've got the evening games coming on, the cars coming in, lights will be protruding into the diamonds and affecting the play. That's the one problem you have with having the parking lot so close. Has the consultant considered that?
There has been a light plan done throughout this process, as well as a tree plan done as well. So all of that will be taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilor Smith.
Sorry, just a point of clarification through you, Mr. Mayor. The light plan, would that consider traffic light or just the lights used to permit lighting on the diamonds?
That's both. That's both diamond lighting and lighting into the ball diamonds as well.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments? So can we have, is there some consensus then that council would like to direct staff to come back with a list of potential amenities that could be included in phase 2 of the project?
Yes.
We have consensus on that, so we can consider that direction, and we'll get that list and use it to help build our terms of reference. So then that moves us on to, well, that moves us to the end of the agenda, so we can go to statements by members and the deputy mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the Olympics is rounded out, I hope everybody was able to watch some of the fantastic performances by not only just the Canadian athletes, but all athletes in general. It was pandemic and the athletes did very, very well. And on that note, we have 2 local residents who are also doing very well. I'd like to make a special mention about Kevin Churchman, a local boy who has just re-signed a new contract with the Minnesota Wild. And the granddaughter of longtime Southampton resident and played in Port Elgin, Doug Leith. His granddaughter, Kristen O'Neill, was just named to the national women's hockey team, which will be competing in the World Championships in August at the end of the month. And this is a stepping stone to the Olympics next year. I know the family very well, and it's good news to see local talent doing so well.
Very good. Thank you. The Vice Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is just a shout out really to all of our local minor soccer coaches and parents, and minor fastball, minor baseball, girls fastball teams, all those coaches and managers and organizers, executive members that are making things happen this summer. It's been a difficult year, but they're back on the fields, and I just wanted to say a big thank you to all those people who are involved with our youth and our community.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Nothing from me tonight, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Grace.
Nothing tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Carr.
Nothing tonight for me either, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Mayat.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just shout out to the volunteers of the Lake Huron Fishing Club who ran a tremendously successful Chantry Chinook Classic. Back for 2021, we did not have the Derby in 2020 for COVID reasons, but this year we surged ahead with it. Mike Hahn, the Derby chairman, did a fantastic job along with his wife Kathy. They ran a great show. We had weighing stations in Carden, Wyerton, Port Elgin, and it was a lot of big fish. We had almost 22-pound salmon and 21 and change trout weighed in. And shout out to Public Works, Steve Galley, or is he Community Services? Community Services, I guess. He was very good, came down, and so was the harbor staff came down and kept the fish cleaning station and garburator. At one point, they had to get the big suck truck down there to clean out a jam in the line as it went out to the road, and they did a tremendous job in very quick order. They were on the job and they got it cleaned out. So thanks to those staff members who helped us there, and thanks to all the volunteers. And final tally's not in, but we understand it was a very successful derby. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Nothing from me this evening, so we'll take a motion to adjourn. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, second by Councillor Smith. All in favor? The Committee of the Whole stands adjourned. We'll reconvene at about 9:05. Call to order this regular council meeting. Second item on the agenda is disclosure of pecuniary interest. Does anyone have one of those they'd like to declare? Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime. We have no additions, deletions, or amendments. We have no public meetings, so that moves us on to adoption of the minutes. And I have a resolution that council adopt the minutes of the council meeting of July 12, 2021, and the planning minutes of July 19, 2021. Excuse me. And note and file the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of July 12, 2021 as presented. Is there a mover and seconder? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Grace. Any questions or comments to any of those sets of minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. That moves us then on to reports of the Committee of the Whole, and we have one report, a general government report regarding the 2020 budget and employee recognition policy. And I have a resolution that council approve the 2022 budget plan and timetable report, and that Tuesday, November 30th and Tuesday, December 7th be reserved to receive the 2022 operating and capital budgets, and that the employee recognition policy be approved. Is there a mover and seconder for the resolution? The Vice Deputy Mayor and Councillor Smith. Questions or comments to the resolution? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. That moves us on to reports of the committee, no, pardon me, reports of municipal officers and committees. And we have two reports there. The first is a staff report on the North Shore Road and Trail Construction Award. And I have a resolution that JAAR Excavating Limited be awarded the contract for the North Shore Road and Trail Construction Project in the amount of $653,105 plus applicable HST, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the necessary documents, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the transfer payment agreement with the province and federal government to receive the ICIP COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Stream Local Government Intake Grant. Is there a mover and seconder for the resolution? Moved by Mattson, seconded by Grace. Questions or comments to that resolution? Seeing none, all in favor? It is carried. And then the second one is a striking committee report on the Bicycle Friendly Community Ad Hoc Committee. And there is a resolution that council approve the terms of reference for the Bicycle Friendly Community Ad Hoc Committee. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by Smith, seconded by Mattson. Questions or comments to that resolution? The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. So will the striking committee meet shortly to select the members?
Yeah, so the striking committee is going to have to meet to do this, and likely to follow up on the Lamont Park fundraising committee terms of reference discussion so that we can get those things back before council. So yes, we'll be having that discussion, and these appointments will be made in accordance with our approach around the committee pool. All right, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. All right. And we have no motions, no bylaws, no close to public. So that moves us right to the confirmatory bylaw. And I have a resolution that bylaw 57/2021, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council of the town of Saugeen Shores, is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 9th day of August 2021. Is there a mover and seconder? Moved by Carr, seconded by Grace. All in favor? That's carried. And then finally, I have a resolution that this regular council meeting of August 9th, 2021 hereby adjourns at 9:09 p.m. Mover and seconder, moved by Smith, second by Mayette. All in favor? Council stands adjourned. Everybody have a good evening.